Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk to interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Tia Hinz. She is a podcaster and a teacher, and we will be talking about that and PTSD since it is PTSD Awareness Month. Welcome, Tia.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is the first time I'm a guest, so
Is that
the
right?
roles have been reversed.
Okay, okay. I've listened to a little bit of a few episodes of your podcast today. I enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I will say my podcast is not for everyone because it is a very
Yeah,
not an easy topic to listen to. So, but
yes, that's true. That's true.
I love it. I've been studying it for 6 years, which is crazy to say. So yeah, I think it's interesting. The fan base that I have collected thinks it's interesting. So
It's all good, right?
right.
So tell us a little bit about your background. Who are you? And bring us up to date.
Yeah. My background is all over the place. So I actually have a master's degree in human rights practice, which I just finished last month. I have a
Congratulations.
bachelor's in literal or liberal studies, which is a fancy word for I created my own major.
That works.
Right. So I have background in mass communications mainly and gender studies. I've worked in marketing. I've worked at car dealerships. I currently work as a toddler teacher. And my main goal is to work for an organization that works with sexual violence because that is my expertise, I will say, other than rape culture. What else about me? I have a lot of mental illness. Like I said, we're talking about post-traumatic stress, but I also have depression, anxiety, OCD tendencies, on top of the PTSD.
Well, man, you should relate very well then.
Yes. And I was actually a mental health advocate for 10 plus years before I switched gears to sexual assault, which is a little weird to switch gears to. But yeah, so I have experience working with post-traumatic stress, and then I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress last year.
Yeah. Okay. So how long have you been teaching?
I have been teaching for 3 years, which I was only supposed to be teaching for a year, and then I haven't left.
Yeah. Okay. Are teachers paid well in your area?
I work for a really nice daycare, so I would say that I get paid fairly well. I wish I was paid more, but I feel like everyone says that. But teachers in Minnesota, there's a high standard for teachers, but they still don't really get paid well.
Yeah. That seems to be the common thread everywhere.
Oh, yes, very much so.
So do you think people with PTSD ever really get over their trauma?
No.
I don't either.
There's a diagram that I used to use when I did public speaking, and it's like a square, and it has your traumatic experience in the middle that's like a blob, and it has arrows pointing everywhere, and it's pushing like social skills, work, all the stuff to the sides, and it's being squished. And that is while it's kind of like during your after it happened and dealing with it, or better word of lack of dealing with it. And then the image is it's a separate blob, and their arrows are inward, but it's still there after you get treatment and after you deal with it.
Yeah.
So I would say no, but I've been dealing with mental illness for 15 years. Ooh, that's a long time. But I've found ways to deal with it and cope with it, so it's manageable. I mean, I still have my bad days, don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect. I have not cured depression, anxiety, or any of those, but I have found ways to make living easier with it.
Okay. Yeah, struggled with depression and anxiety all my life too, so I know it's can be a bitch.
Yes, very much.
So, which has caused you the most trouble? Depression, anxiety, or PTSD, or can you even separate them?
It is really hard to separate. I didn't even know that I had post-traumatic stress, which is ironic because I was a health advocate for so long, and I researched that stuff. And when my therapist told me, he was like, in my first session with him, he was like, have you ever been diagnosed with this? And I was like, no, because I don't have it. And he's like, I would like to do like some standardized testing, because he can't just be like, you have it, because that would be unethical. But he was like, yeah, I want to do further testing. And yep, sure enough, I had it. I thought all those symptoms were my anxiety. So my anxiety and the post-traumatic stress do overlap a lot. I wouldn't say for me, my depression does not overlap with my post-traumatic stress. But I would say post-traumatic stress is in the last year that I've been aware of it. And my anxiety has been higher than the rest.
Well, I think in 2020, everybody's anxiety went through the roof.
Oh, yes.
And I think we all have complex PTSD also. I mean, how could we not? You know, the
Oh,
things we
for
went through
sure.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people have really high anxiety over germs now, and like
Yeah.
washing their hands. And
Yeah.
I saw someone, because I don't know if it's the same where you are, but masks aren't mandated anymore.
They're not mandated here anymore either. I'm in East Tennessee.
Yeah. And so someone walked in with their mask, and if I know a panic attack, and they were on the verge of a panic attack because they saw quite a, I mean, we have half and half
Yeah.
where I am right now, but it freaked them out that there wasn't people wearing masks, and they just left the store. And so, yeah, I would agree that there is a lot of mental health stuff that is going to come from COVID, and they're not going to realize it until everything starts opening up and
Yeah.
everything is shifted again.
And there's been a lot more suicides, a lot more people uh, relapsing or recovery from alcohol and drugs. And it's created a lot more crisis than just the virus.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I used to be a suicide advocate too. I was just an advocate for everything, and I still get emails and stuff like that, and I still stay up to date with the field of suicide prevention. And the numbers are looking very bleak and scary from the last year.
Yeah. Well, I know what it's like to feel suicidal, been there, done that, and it's not a good place to be.
Same. It's a little odd for me because when I was younger, I had all the suicidal thoughts and I had all this stuff and I worked through it, and then I lost someone to suicide when I was older. And so I have kind of experienced both sides of the same coin, and it's definitely changed my perspective of suicide.
For those who don't know, what is PTSD exactly? Can you give people a working definition of that?
Yeah, so it's post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's very, very broad. I think when people think of PTSD, they think of soldiers because that is the most common thing that we're talked about. So it's when someone experiences something traumatic, and it could be literally anything, and it imprints on them. I think the statistic is like not everyone that goes to war has PTSD. So there's a statistic of a percentage, and it's how our brain is connected that we have a higher chance of getting post-traumatic stress when a traumatic experience happens. So I don't like the term post-traumatic stress because it is so broad and it is so encompassing of so many different things, but it is just anything traumatic, and you live with the consequences of it after. So you have the nightmares, you have the intrusive thoughts, the flashbacks. You can have physical pain. I mean, for me, I don't know if anyone has experienced a panic attack, but there's a tightness in your chest. I've experienced that for the last 4 years nonstop. And apparently that's part of my post-traumatic
Every day?
stress every day.
Wow.
So if I ever have a heart attack, I will never know because I have a tightness in my chest that it has lessened, but it is still constantly there. People that have post-traumatic stress have fatigue, but it's mainly the flashbacks, the intrusive thoughts, and kind of like the mental aspect, but there is definitely the physical aspect that not very many people realize.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your podcast. It's called something like
Legacy
rape
of
culture.
rape culture. Yep. So it's funny enough. So legacy of rape culture is a term used in the field that the fear that women experience or that women experience when they think about sexual assault, because it's 68 not 68%, 68 seconds. Every 68 seconds, someone in the US is sexually assaulted.
Wow.
So I don't know how long we've been recording, but you can do the math. It's probably like 2 or 3 or probably way more than that. And so the fear is there for a lot of women and men. We talk about women because it majoritarily affects women, but men are affected too.
Yeah.
And so that fear is called the legacy of rape culture. And I thought it was only fitting to name my podcast that, because a lot of us have that fear. There was a thing trending on social media. I don't know if you were aware of it, but it's called the 98%. So 98% of women have experienced some form of sexual harassment, sexual assault, all of those things that are in, fall under that umbrella. And so people were like, what age did you become the 98%? And so that fear is very real. And it's crazy to me to think that every woman that I know, I can't say every woman experiences the fear of sexual assault, but we're kind of trained like that. You're taught to protect yourself. You're taught to that if this happens, do this, if you're all this stuff. So that fear
Isn't that a good thing though?
What?
Isn't that a good thing to be taught that?
Yes and no. So if we were teaching women to be safe, as well as teaching men not to be predators, then it would be good. But right now the education is solely on women. We don't really teach our men about consent. We don't teach men, and I use gender terms very loosely because women can be predators as well, and men can be victims / survivors as well. But so that's where it's missing, is if we were teaching women and teaching men, then yeah, that'd be great. But we're kind of missing 50% of the education that needs to happen. And so that fear really drives women and some men, and post-traumatic stress happens a lot higher in sexual assault and sexual violence because the fear is already there.
Yeah. So what other kinds of sexual assault and violence are there besides rape? I mean, what is there, like a spectrum?
Yeah, so sexual violence is a very, very broad term. You can find anything under that is physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, and there's another one that I never can remember, but that's so there's these areas where it's not just physical. I've been learning a lot about spiritual abuse and financial abuse because that's not something that I don't think is talked about a lot, especially in the field. I've been in the field for 6 years and we still don't talk about it unless it's in the realm of like domestic violence, which those are way more common, but it's not abnormal to see them in the global sense of sexual violence. So yeah, there's those categories that is under sexual violence or gendered violence. Those terms are interchangeable.
Now, were you ever sexually assaulted or raped?
I was not.
Good.
So I came into this world because I was wearing a t-shirt. I was wearing an It's On Us t-shirt, which is a campaign, a national-wide campaign on college campuses. And my dean saw it and she was like, hey, can you bring this to my campus? And I was like, sure. And that's how I kind of jumped into it. And then I obviously did research, which pissed me off. Anyone that does research on sexual assault is pissed off. And I spent my last 2 years of undergrad bringing peer education to my campus. And then when I graduated, I felt lost. And so I went into my human rights practice because I needed more education and spend more dollars.
Yeah. So do you think women have more or less responsibility in deterring sexual violence than men?
If we're talking about it in terms of the male as the predator and the woman as the victim, I would say women are less. Because we always say like the victim blaming mindset is what were you drinking? How much did you drink? What were you wearing? All that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you look at sexual assaults, it really doesn't matter. People have been sober, people have been drunk, people have been on substance, people have not been on substance. There's not an outlying characteristic that a woman has done or that can do. Like, it doesn't matter what they're wearing. It doesn't matter if they walked alone. It doesn't matter any of those. Because even if you're in a group, it could be acquaintance rape, which is the highest rape, which is just someone you know. So even if you thought you trusted this person and they walked you home, you're doing what's safe. You're not walking by yourself, but the person you're walking with is actually the predator. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what the women do. You can be sexually assaulted no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, you still take all the precaution you can though, right? I mean, you don't walk through dark alleys at midnight and things like that.
Oh, yes. Yes. I lock my doors immediately when I get in. I used to have a radio shift that ended at midnight and I had to walk across my campus. I always called either my mother because she worked overnights, or I called my best friend, which, come to find out, 3 years later, she never went to sleep until I got home because she was freaked out. So I definitely do for myself and my friends, have these things that are implemented in my life that are just kind of second nature. I don't think about it as much, but yes, I definitely still do it, even though I do this education, and I try to educate men and women to know about sexual assault, be a bystander, and all this stuff. But yes, I definitely try to keep myself safe as well.
Yeah. You know, a lot of men from my generation were taught, to have, what's the word I'm looking for? Pursue a woman, and women want to be pursued, and you just got to be persistent and keep at it. But nowadays, that's considered what?
Creepy.
Okay.
I mean, in a sense, I guess. So I had a guest that he's an educator for BDMS, which is like the kinky community. And the big thing in that community is consent. And then he made the comment that, because everyone says like you have to communicate what you want and what you don't want for consent to be effective. And he made this comment that why would you want to sleep with someone? Obviously, this is like just sleeping, but why would you want to sleep with someone if they weren't into it? And that could be like, if the person's not interested right away, then most likely they're not going to be interested. So I guess in my field and my mindset, if someone's persistent, that sets off a red flag, because I'm a big person in boundaries. And so if you're passing those boundaries, I don't appreciate it. So it's a red flag. And I just halt. Like, no, I don't want to go any further. But I do have a lot of people that come back with that mindset of, well, I was just raised like you do ask once or twice or 3 times. Yeah. You do pursue them because women like to be pursued. And I do think that mindset is changing, but I think it's changing slowly. I do think some women do like to be pursued. I'm not going to say that not all women coast, because I can't speak for all women. But for a majority of us, we would like to hear or be heard when we say like, hey, no. Because I think that's the thing that freaks a lot of us out, is we're not being heard.
Is it different with women who identify as being liberals and women who identify as being conservative? Do you think the expectations and rules are different?
I'm going to try not to get in trouble. So I'll be full transparency. I'm a liberal. I am more left. So it's hard for me to put that mindset into conservatives because I'm not one. I will say the conservatives women that I know have different values. And some of the values that we have that differ is the nuclear family. And a lot of times, like I went to school with someone that went to college just to find a husband. And that blew my mind because I was like, you're spending all this money to find a husband, but that's just how she was raised. That is her, how she found her nuclear family. Now, did she get a degree? Yes, she didn't just drop out when she found her boyfriend. But so that there's that differences in what a nuclear family is. And I think how we look at a nuclear family and how we interpret a nuclear family definitely changes those views. And in my experience, liberals have a different view of the nuclear family as do conservatives. So I would say that there's probably a difference, but I'm looking at it from one point of view. So I don't want to say that that is how it is.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So what was your childhood like? Did you have a good childhood? Did you have trauma? I mean,
I had a lot of trauma. So I don't actually remember most of my childhood. And the stuff that I do remember isn't the greatest.
yeah.
I wish I remembered the good stuff because I know that there is some, but for a safety mechanism, I kind of shut it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I come from a family, or I come from a hometown that cancer is really prevalent. And I didn't realize that it was just like a town thing. I thought the whole world just you could name like 40 people that have had cancer. Apparently that's not a thing. So like I was surrounded by a lot of like sick and death, and that affected my mental state I lived there from age 0 to 12. So that kind of pathed my way of how I see the world. But yes, very much traumatic, very much. I'm not going to say it was a bad childhood because it has molded me into the person I am today. But yeah, and I grew up with very, very conservative viewpoints,
Yeah.
which also has kind of guided the way that I think now.
Yeah. So what would you say has been your biggest challenge?
In life in general,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, being confident in my own voice, because I grew up, so I'm actually queer as well. So I grew up with the negativity towards that community. I grew up with putting down women in a joking manner. So being a woman that is queer, I had a lot of negativity thrown my way, and just society in general. The beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason. They put down women so that we buy their products. And for a long time, I didn't have confidence in my own voice. I mean, it took me I wanted to start a podcast back in college. So like 3 years to actually start a podcast because I didn't have the confidence and I didn't think people cared about my voice and what I had to say.
Yeah.
So that has definitely been the biggest struggle. And I wish I could say that I'm 100% cured and I have the most confidence in my voice, but that is definitely not true. It's a work in progress, but I like to think of life as a novel. There's always the next page until it's over. So it's just a writing session that keeps going on. And there's character growth in the future, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. So do you have any advice to give for people that are in fear of being sexually assaulted or in fear because they have been sexually assaulted?
Yeah. So I would say that for both, you're not alone. I think in our society, we alienate a lot of people to think that this is a one act thing and this only happened to you because you did X, Y, and Z, and that is not true. Like I said, 68 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted in America.
Yeah.
You are not alone. Advice, I would say, if you're in fear of being sexually assaulted, it's just always going to be there. I mean, I'm still in fear constantly that something's going to happen. And I don't think that fear is going to go away until systematic change happens in the way that we educate, in the way that we teach our children things. If you have been sexually assaulted, find your tribe, find your community, find your support, because that is what's going to get you through it. If it just happened, you definitely need the support. And I know a lot of people don't want to reach out to people or tell people because there's this stigma and there's this shame, but it's not shameful. You did nothing wrong. So find those people, lean on those people. And there's organizations that work with sexual assault all over America, and there's some in other countries too. And reach out. They're there to help you for a reason.
Yeah. So do you want to share the name of your podcast again and where people can hear it?
Yeah. So it's called Legacy of Rape Culture. You can find it on everywhere that podcasts are. I mean, my most common ones are Apple and Spotify. And I have a website called rapecultureis.com. And if you want to look at where those podcasts are, you can go to rapecultureis.com/link-tree, and all the links are there.
Okay, great. Well, is there anything else you want to say that I haven't given you an opportunity to say?
Yes, I'm going to read this because I think this is always here, which is ironic, but it says, remind yourself what you've been able to overcome, warrior status. I think that is a perfect thing to wrap up post-traumatic stress, because whatever you went through, it was hard and it was not pleasant. And I'm sorry you went through that, but you getting through that is the definition of warrior status, and you are not alone.
Good deal. Thank you, Tia, for being my guest. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I've enjoyed talking to you, and I wish you all the best with your life and with your podcast. And thanks again. Folks, thanks for tuning in to Holding On with Holder. Please subscribe to my channel. Feel free to share this video all over social media. And be sure to check out Tia's podcast, Legacy of Rape Culture, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks again, Tia. I will let you go, and you have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.